Hello everyone, Marco here. Today I just wanted to do a quick little video on Jordan Peterson and some of the controversy that happened earlier this month in regards to an article written by The Forward, which is titled, "Is Jordan Peterson Enabling Jew Hatred?" So, to summarize the article very quickly, I mean, the title makes it sound like this is going to be a polemic, looking at the issue from both sides, let's look at it from a reasonable angle, but that's not the case. Basically, the article is kind of like a hit piece, basically, and what it's drawing the conclusion, or trying to draw the conclusion, is that Jordan Peterson is anti Semitic because he doesn't use the words anti Semitism enough when describing the Holocaust. And I think that's disingenuous, and a lot of other people think it's disingenuous. So I wanted to kind of do a quick little video on showing exactly what lessons we can learn, and basically the lessons in regards to how to make a good argument, and essentially how to, I'm trying not to be harsh, but how to not look like an idiot when engaging in debates, political and debates that you could have a lot of eyes watching you. So let's get into it. So let's look at some of the images that I have here. And image number one, lesson number one, is beware of strawman arguments and fallacy of compositions. So with strawman arguments, that's very simple. It's just if you're going to argue with someone, don't misconstrue their arguments. Don't say they're saying this when in reality they're saying that. If you can legitimately present your opponent's argument in the best light possible, and saying what they're really saying, then when you argue against them, your arguments are going to hold a lot more water. People are going to be like, okay, that's right. And the fallacy of composition is something we'll look into just right now when we pull out some of the quotes, essentially. So let's get into some of the arguments that Mr. Feldman, I feel, really does himself a disservice here. So this quote here right in the middle: Jordan Peterson is a public intellectual adored by neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and conspiracy theorists. Okay, and then he quotes this one website, which I never heard of, the Daily Stormer, that Jordan Peterson is the savior of Western civilization. So okay, so you're able to pull this one quote. Does this one quote, what you're basically trying to do, what he's basically trying to do is saying, look, there's some neo-Nazis that adore Jordan Peterson, therefore his whole message and everything else that he says is anti-Semitic, it's bigoted, and you should just not listen to anything that he says. That's the fallacy of composition, right? Are we honestly to believe that every single person that attends a Jordan Peterson rally is a neo-Nazi? Every single one that watches his YouTube videos? Obviously that's ridiculous, right? And I'm not even saying nobody's been able to prove that there's actual neo-Nazis that attend his website, not that I know of anyway. But even if it is true, even if he does have a handful of people, that neo-Nazis that adore him, are we supposed to believe that his whole audience is made up of that just because you can point to like a handful of people? That's completely disingenuous, and most people realize that, which is why Mr. Feldman, has been getting just demolished online after writing this piece, right? And the second part right here, so we basically, Mr. Feldman has quoted two academics here, this Heidi Beerich and this Dr. Lipstadt, and both of them were basically saying the same thing, that because Dr. Peterson points out to Jewish higher average, normal than higher average IQs as the source of why they've been able to, achieve some positions of power in society, and not just questioning anti-Semitism. That because he's doing that, he's actually enabling Holocaust deniers and all that. Which again, this attempt by Mr. Feldman, is disingenuous, because obviously Dr. Peterson, anybody who watches his lectures, he goes off on Nazism and he goes off on communism. A lot of his work is based on figuring out how people get to those positions, right? How do you become that? And I think it's a valid question. Like, take for example that football player, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Kirkpatrick. Honestly, I forget his name. I don't watch sports that much. But anyway, basically, because he failed to kneel at the national anthem, looking at the debate around that and looking at Trump supporters, because Trump got into that debate a lot. I was watching it and I was like, man, like, look at the way your mob mentality, look at the way you want this guy to pledge allegiance to the flag and all that, say whatever you want, man, but I have a feeling that if I teleport you in early 1930s Nazi Germany, you're in there at like the rallies, the Hitler rallies, with your Nazi salute and everything else. And I see that a lot, right, in society, with the mob mentality from the left and the right. I'm just like, man, you're not too far off. Like, it wouldn't take too much work to get you to that point, right? And that's Dr. Peterson's point, right? That Nazism wasn't just a one-off that, like, in the course of history, it wasn't like some glitch that, like, those people in Nazi Germany had something fundamentally wrong inside their core. His idea is that, you work on people long enough, you change the culture and you change their leaders. There's every one of us has the capacity for evil inside of us, and we need to be very, very careful that we don't begin the road towards those type of ideologies that, obviously bring about a lot more suffering. So that's his point right there. So yeah, beware of straw manning and fallacy of compositions, because they don't help out your argument. And the second lesson that we can glean from all this is basically beware of Goodwin's law. So what is Goodwin's law? Well, basically Goodwin's law is, if you never heard of it, and it's it just basically says this: the longer internet discussion goes on, or the more people join, the likelihood that someone is going to get compared to Hitler goes to 1. So it just basically speaks to the condition that, like, the second we disagree with someone, you're going to say, well, you're a fascist, or, well, Hitler did this, so, because Hitler did that, then everything that comes out of your mouth is not worth listening to, right? And how did Mr. Feldman break Goodwin's law? Well, when the article originally came out, he posted Jordan Peterson's picture right next to Hitler. So he's kind of like just juxtaposing the two ideas. He's kind of trying to draw some link, right? Basically saying, hey, look, Jordan Peterson, you had these similarities to Hitler, and Hitler is bad, therefore anything that comes out of your mouth is wrong. And that's basically what he's trying to do. And so to me, that's in violation of Goodwin's law. So basically my point with that, and the point that anybody can take away, whether you're right and left, is if you get the urge to compare somebody to Hitler or Stalin, especially if you're heated or angry, the smartest thing would probably be to bite your tongue. Bite your tongue, man, because it's probably not a good idea. But then again, I don't think it's unfair to necessarily always leave it out, because, like Dr. Peterson says, you get to fascism and to communism, there are steps to get there, right? And I think it's fair to point out, if you disagree with somebody's policy or viewpoints, to say, hey, that's the first step towards fascism, or that is the first step to communism, because, we have to be able to draw those things, but just don't go right ahead and scream out Hitler, the second you disagree with somebody's argument. That's probably not a good way to be taken seriously. So that's lesson number 2. And lesson number 3 from all this, the left versus right paradigm is becoming obsolete. And with that, let's take another image here, looking at political spectrums. So, the question is, why would Mr. Feldman go through all this trouble to represent Mr. Peterson? Why would he do this? I had to sit down and really think about it. Why would you go out of your way? Why would you take this risk of looking so stupid and so dumb, And basically, the only thing I could point out to was that they disagree with Dr. Peterson's other ideas, on political correctness, on hierarchies, and a whole bunch of other things. This thing that Mr. Peterson doesn't necessarily attribute to Nazism, to anti-Semitism. It's an incredibly small part of all his work. He does so much other work, but basically, this is just the most convenient way for Mr. Feldman and others to completely discredit all his other work, right? And why is that? Because Dr. Peterson, if we look at the first political spectrum here, he's basically criticizing communism and socialism. He eviscerates them with his arguments. And so the easiest way for these academics to fight back and saying, well, okay, you have neo-Nazis attending your lectures, so therefore you must be an extreme fascist. So whatever you say is crap, And that's one way to go about it. But Dr. Peterson is like, well, hold on, I'm not a fascist here. He honestly, for the most part, he stays away from the political thing. But from what I can glean from other lectures and other things that I caught of, he's probably most likely a moderate, right? And he does use the first. I do believe he views the world in terms of the first spectrum that you see here. But I'm just proposing the idea that what we can learn from all this is to kind of use the second spectrum here as a more realistic conception of how we can view politics and politics, right? Which is to view basically the spectrum not as left or right, but as, on the left you put maximum intervention in the lives of people on the left and complete freedom on the right. So if we view it in this way, then most people are like, we accept some restrictions on our freedom, but we don't want complete control like the communists and the fascists do, right? And in this spectrum, it kind of, basically the results of communism and fascism are the same thing, or complete control. So the second spectrum, when you're looking at policy, is probably a better way to look at things. But we'll examine the first spectrum too, because we'll probably do this in another video. But it's also important to realize that fascism and communism come from two different aspects, right? I look more as communism as a revolution, as revolutionary, trying to tear down some of the institutions of society, where fascism is more traditionalist in that it tries to impose the current structure of society and solidify it and counter the revolutionary aspects of communism. So I think they come from two very different motivations, and then when you look at it at that sense, the first spectrum does make more sense. But like I said, basically what this Mr. Feldman piece is also teaching us is that, maybe it's not always correct to view left, right, the politics as left and right, and communism on the far left, fascism on the far right, because, look at this. I mean, if we look at the first one, putting libertarianism next to fascism, does that make sense to anyone here? Or libertarians really one step away from being fascist? It doesn't seem right to me. But anyway, that's the video that we have so far. I definitely plan to talk about Jordan Peterson's ideas, more about his other ideas, and I look forward to that. And if you want to comment or get in touch with me, there's some info in the description. I also have a blog if you want to check that out, so feel free to get in touch with me if you have any ideas of your own or any comments, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.